Martin?
Ito malis.
Just one moment. Guys, we are. So,
So let's begin. Hi everybody. Here we are with the fourth interview of the day, and we are with Maham and Emanuele of the Free University of London. The Free University of London is a grassroots project acting upon critics of the current state of the higher education in a variety of different ways. By supporting more democratic educational process. It seeks to give a platform for marginalized forms of knowledge and make university education universally accessible. So we want to reconstruct your experience, starting from the protest, from the occupation of different school uh, uh, from different school in London, like Goldsmith, KCL, LSA, LSE, among others. So, if you please can talk about the occupation and what are the big issues you have focused on, and what are the main demands of this protest?
Okay. It's okay if I answer, Mahan? Yeah, I'll answer this. So, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. So pretty much what occurred was about 2-3 months ago. Some students from LSE, which kind of was the first occupation of this group, went to an occupation which was women only at Senate House, which is another campus, another university campus here in London, and then went back to LSE and occupied with a broader critique of what university had become. Unlike many other circumstances or many other occupations, which kind of are tied to further destruction of the university or further cuts, or as you see now in Italy, for example, change in policy or the way schools will be run, there wasn't like one specific factor, potential change in policy being proposed, which kind of stimulated the initial occupation. It was kind of broadly, a critique of what university had already become here in the United Kingdom and especially at LSE. I say that in particular about LSE, and that's where I've studied and that's where I study, is because, it really has become like the epitome of the neoliberal university. In Italy and in other European countries as well, it has not gone this far. Universities still have not gotten to resemble with such similarity businesses. It is, the transformative process. That's obviously the direction that has been taken elsewhere in Europe as well. But as what we've seen here is already because unlike in the United States where there's still for free or for very low cost, here it is pretty much the minimum you have to pay per year to go and study is £9,000 on top of all the other living costs and expenses. So just to kind of recap what occurred, we come up, we released a statement, really emphasizing the critique of the neoliberalization, the marketization, the commodification of knowledge of, university, and trying to, in a way, reclaim the idea that education is a value in its own right, that one studies and one goes to university not merely for the degree, diploma, and the future job that comes with it, but mainly tied, focusing on the learning process, etc. So what occurred here, there was a pretty pretty wide support on campus. LSE is a university that unfortunately is best known for its economics department and does draw to it many students that seek a financial career in the London city, or in financial businesses afterwards. So even having had that sort of response on campus with about the initial core of about 40-50 people willingly engaged in the whole process was already something to an extent unexpected, and that kind of led into what was a 6-week-long occupation, which was kind of divided and kind of became more than focused on the demands, emphasizing the whole process. And so, using the space to start running activities, doing, forms of self-education, putting on lectures, seminars, discussions, and all various other sorts of activities, while in parallel using that space and the time and the discussions to articulate demands that were going to be posed to university management. And so it was kind of like this dual stream of it. So we kind of went in with not, obviously with broader critiques and certain aspects that wanted to be addressed about the way university was run, but also with the intent of articulating more in detail what those demands were going to be. And they kind of ended up being focused around 5 topics. The first, access to university. I mean, obviously, it's difficult to go and demand from the university board free education, given that it is government finance and it has to be a government decision. But we asked for all lectures to be publicly accessible, and for the director, who was a prominent figure, unfortunately, within Europe, Craig Calhoun, to release a statement supporting and endorsing free education. The second was tied to workers' rights. There was this issue in the UK, it's called zero-hour contract, but it's working contracts with no job security, which one can get fired under any circumstances. It was, trying to articulate and demand to put an end to the zero-hour contracts on campus. The third was tied to university democracy, to finding ways through which to develop systems to which students and staff would be able to more directly influence the way university is run. And the fourth and the fifth were tied to issues of liberation, so as against forms of discrimination on campus, be it based on gender, ethnicity, race, disability, etc., and trying to implement different forms that would attain to those difficulties. And the last was tied to divestment. And just to finish the recap of LSE, the occupation lasted for 6 weeks, during which obviously these demands were posed, but also we valued a lot what was being done with the space itself while that the kind of time occurred. And then it concluded with kind of a last-minute negotiation with the director, who presented himself to the occupation, and we managed to get 8-9 demands through, one of which is public access to all lectures, a couple tied more rhetorically but somewhat tied to democracy, and as well statement on workers' rights, endorsement of public education, and a couple policy implementation that would protect against sexual harassment on campus, and a commitment to not an explicit commitment, but something tied to divestment as well. I'll just finish, and I'm being a bit too long. Just on a London-wide base, kind of what happened is that I don't want to say following the LSE occupation, because I think it was one event which possibly did spur on other occupations to come forth. But after LSE, we had UAL, University of Arts London, which went into occupation, Goldsmiths University, which went into occupation, and King's College London, which went into occupation. And I think it was also an interesting event seeing all 4 of these universities together in occupation, because they also showed somewhat the differences on each campus, and how and allowed us to reflect on how to be able to tie together different causes and different circumstances that one finds on various university campuses. For example, UAL, still there? Yeah. Pronto? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just turn off the microphone. So
That's fine. Okay. So UAL went into occupation, for example, with a more concrete, we can say, demand, or somewhat in response to a more concrete and imminent issue, which was the cuts, massive cuts to these foundation courses, which are funding for like 2-3 year programs, which is not exactly the same as a bachelor degree, but is usually a program which one engages in prior to doing a bachelor, and which is, oftentimes, or for the most part, used by families and people who are not as privileged. So again, more directly touching working class students. And so, they engage with that. And while, King's College and Goldsmiths as well were articulating broader critiques to what university had become, but at the same time, also being focused on the concrete issues that lied on each campus. So just to kind of tie this together, and so this kind of broad process, we got a bit of engagement, which I don't know if it'd been seen in general, like in London. From what I take it, I'm new here. I just got here last year. From what I take it, there's been somewhat of a downplay of student activism since 2010 student movement, which was in response to the tripling of the fees. And it was good to see somewhat the response and the engagement that students had on 4 university campuses, tied not only on the defense, and that's this is a good thing. It's like it's not only defending against the further destruction of university, but also kind of somewhat clearly acknowledging and clearly combating what university has already become, at least in this country, and unfortunately the trend is elsewhere, which is this kind of like service institution, which is again resembles a private business more than an educational institution. And that was interesting. The last point that I think is important to make, especially given the condition in London, is that these 4 universities are all very privileged in a way. I mean, they're already elite institutions. LSE is even in a student base, it's exceptionally elitist and privileged. And the same kind of goes with KCL, UAL, and Goldsmiths. So on one side, I think it's important to highlight, and it's incredibly good what happened and that all the occupations went through, but at the same time, more working class institutions, and the ones that are actually facing the most dramatic cuts, London Met is one of them, UAL as well, but there's a variety of these institutions in London. They call them the post-94 universities, I think, which developed, I'm not going to engage with that. I don't know enough about it, but these are the places where there is really drastic cuts coming along, and also where the education is really, oftentimes the level is very low, and notwithstanding that level, students still end up paying 6,000, 9,000 pounds per year, getting indebted for it. So I mean, the spectrum of issues within British universities is pretty tragic in general. And while there was these 4 university occupations, it has to be much more, I think, for things to start changing a bit more. Sorry, I gave a bit of a long answer to the question, but I hope I gave somewhat of an outflow or outplay of what happened.
But it was okay. Don't worry.
Yeah, but in the last 6 months, we saw others occupation in Europe, like in Paris, in Amsterdam, and we can call it like a global movement for free education. Have you any connection with the other free education movement?
Yeah. So that was one of the most amazing things, which I think this is me being from LSE and kind of having engaged with that occupation, was somewhat the external response that we got. So while on campus it was received so in general, social media, Facebook, etc. The response of it, even not even in the UK, but in Europe in general, was very, very large. And we, you know, from the beginning, we kind of, and we mentioned this in this statement that we released. You know, there was a ongoing occupation in Amsterdam at the time, which now unfortunately has come to the end, of the Magden House, which was, you probably know, I imagine you've already spoken about it today, but you know, which was, which lasted for about 60 days, and again was tied, you know, calling for a much broader democracy within university. And yeah, and we, you know, we made very strong ties with them from, you know, from the first day we occupied. We started contacting each other. There was a few friends in common. We ended up doing a couple Skype calls, and then we received four people from the Magden House showed up to the LSE occupation to show solidarity, to help us out. You know, we were just at the beginning, not even quite understanding what we were trying to get engaged with, and yeah, they gave us massive support and solidarity. And you know, with that, and I think that was also the praise in having, and one of the advantages and one of the things of having them come over is also kind of like widens the scope of what was going on. I mean, obviously at the time, you know, you read, when you're informed in the news, you read of how various things are actually going on, and various, you know, occupations are going around in Europe tied to university. But you know, with them coming over, and in general, you know, what they were doing really showed, especially at that moment. You know, we started looking around. You saw in Toronto, students were rising up. You saw in Rome, there was, you know, another stream of occupations and student activism tied to the implementation of policies. You saw, you know, in Macedonia, there was a massive occupation. After that followed Poland. And, you know, so it really is, and you know, it was, I would say, because I guess I perceive the occupation somewhat as being over, but it definitely shows that, yeah, there is a global student movement. I mean, students are rising up, students are organizing, and that is a good step in, you know, in showing that. I think it's fundamental to, it's a fundamental aspect to keep going. And I think, hello? Yeah, and yeah, and yeah, okay. So yeah, and you know, it's again at times the one reflection I'd like to have, especially here, what I was saying.
Just think, because one of the person who's following us asked if you can just please up your voice.
Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. I think one of the fundamental things, you know, that you also that we realize here is, you know, we have to start seeing it at times, especially within the movement, or within, you know, in the daily engagement with political activity. You know, you can read that, oh, there's an occupation here, there's a student movement here, or students are doing something here, there, or wherever. But the minute, you know, you start getting into contact with them, the minute you start doing, you know, even like super pictures of solidarity or whatever it is, and start making those connections, and you really start feeling it, and you start seeing it, and you actually start believing, rightfully so, that there is something much bigger than one single occupation going on. And it truly is so. And I think, you know, even the connections that just, even with a sign saying solidarity with, you know, X occupation or Rome occupation or whatever, and you start looking at how many things are going on at the same time at any moment, yeah, there is a movement going. I mean, you know, and you start believing that, and the minute you start believing that, things actually get bigger, and, you know, it's somewhat also performative in its own act. So.
And one of the most powerful things I saw in Madrid 3 or 4 years ago when I was there is like that there were a broader movement, not only struggle students, students for I don't know, for the housing. There were Marea Ciudadana. I don't know how to translate it.
A citizen wave.
Yeah,
waves with different colors. Every issue, every struggle had a color.
Different interests.
With different interests, but every movement had was united in a unique movement. So there was solidarity between among them. So I don't know if you have links with other movements in of worker struggles of other citizen movements in London.
Okay, yeah. I think this kind of ties a bit more to the broader political issues. And again, I just came to London 6 months ago, so maybe Maham as well will correct my answer with regards to it. But my kind of interpretation of it, is especially compared to Italy or especially compared to other Southern European countries, there is not as much political engagement outside of parliamentary politics in the UK as other places. That does not mean there isn't. It's it is less. And on top of that, in a city like London, where there is political activity and where there are a lot of groups, a lot of it is community focused, and London is a huge city, so at times it really is kind of difficult to make these stops. Having said this, I think again, especially at LSE, what we kind of saw during the occupation, at least, was how the importance of a space, having a space in central London. LSE again is in central London, which is obviously the place where you have a bit more money to live, and it's obviously inhabited by people in ties and etc. But yeah, even just having the space in this area kind of brought together a whole whole people, different activists engaged in so many different issues, from workers' rights to a lot of squatters and people doing this occupy democracy, people fighting issues around debt, that really began to, in a non-formalized way, but we began to make this network of connections just merely by having the space, which is something that is tragically lacking in this city. And I think it's it's one of the especially in the more central areas, one of the main ways in which there is really little political engagement. But broader than this, and this is something that has emerged especially in the last couple weeks after the election of the Tory government, there has been kind of, obviously people were very upset about the fact that the Tory government got elected, but also got an unprecedented majority, not unprecedented, but unexpected majority. And there has been now just coming about is a broader attempt organized by this group called the Brick Lane Debates, but somewhat, coordinated by a variety of different groups to try and get together somewhat of a broader movement within London at least, and then maybe outside of that, of various grassroots organizations, and trying to form a decentralized network or structure, and trying to find ways to coordinate where necessary, and not trying to build a new organization or association, but trying to find ways somewhat work with each other and solidarize in a more structured manner, which somewhat was lacking, or which is lacking to an extent up until now. Now maybe Maham can can go a bit further on that. I don't know if she might have a divergence of opinion, but I think and that's something also within because some of these occupations have formed more groups or student groups in London, or have reinforced certain student groups in London, one of which is kind of this Free University of London, which is not really a group, but it's a broader project, and we can talk about that in a little bit. And yeah, and there is a strong attempt to try and make connections between student activities and student movements with broader issues, which is fundamental, of course. But maybe Maham can specify. Il microfono.
Can you hear me? So yeah, in terms of broadening out the struggles, I think a lot of that happened after the 2010 student movement, when a lot of students had been fighting for against the raising tuition fees. Kind of when we lost that vote in Parliament, then everyone kind of went back to their locality and started looking at ways to fight the cuts necessarily on the education bucket. So there's a lot of groups that have formed past years. So to save the National Health Service, to save public services, a lot of students get involved in the day-to-day kind of life activities of the various struggles that society as a whole is facing. And in universities, a lot of that focused around migrant workers and the rights that they weren't being given, and basically dividing the division in our universities between like first-class laborers and second-class laborers. So over the past 5 years, at least in London, pretty much every university that went from not even giving their workers a minimum wage to now giving cleaners and catering staff and security staff a living wage. So there is localized small actions that go beyond education, but we haven't seen anything work on a national level, which is kind of where it differs from other European countries, I suppose. Kind of missed a lot, so I'm not quite sure what else we're talking about.
I think we lost some parts of what you said because of the connection.
Okay.
But
one would think that in London at least you have good internet, but it's not even, you don't even have that in this country.
we can hear you perfectly. We cannot
Here,
hear very well.
Maham.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe she's a noisy place.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Just because we
Too much
listen to the noise in the background, that's your voice.
Sorry.
Do you want me to repeat what I said?
Japanese girl at a gay.
And like,
When I miss you.
Yeah, I don't know if I think we can barely hear Maham. So I don't know if the question was answered, or if we want to articulate it a bit more. I can speak. Okay, I'll speak.
Okay,
No, we can go.
Ah.
We can go.
with another question.
Okay.
So, what has been the response of the institution?
Yes, because I mean, during and after the occupation of the university, of yours or of the other ones, which was the response from the institutions, from the universities, towards your protests, your
Occupiers,
demands, and your occupation?
Okay. So I mean, this is the 4 different universities kind of had different responses. So we can start UAL, which was facing these cuts to the foundation courses, and who as well had various demands, but the main point was to stop the cuts. They occupied the space where there is where the administration works. So all the bureaucrats, and did heavily impede kind of the ongoing work of the university. And with it, what happened? They were, I think, in occupation for about 4 weeks. I'm not exactly sure how long it went, but it ended with, before the end of it, management proposed some non-commitment, but we'll say, we'll review the cuts, which obviously means nothing. And so they obviously refused that proposal and stayed into occupation. But then management brought the students to court and attempted to get an injunction, which is a document allowing the police to come in and evict the students. So they were taken to court, and after being taken to court, they kind of left the occupation, and are continuing to kind of fight against the cuts from outside of it. The other 2 occupations, Goldsmith's occupation achieved some of the demands that they were asking for. King's College as well. King's College, the occupation somewhat died down, and LSE actually got about 8 demands met. I think the interesting thing was, I think this is somewhat to look at it a bit in a broader picture. In the UK, at least in the last year, there has been, especially for universities outside of London, we have Warwick, Birmingham, I think Sheffield also recently. Student occupations have been received, and Senate House, I guess last year as well, and and Maham is probably much more informed about it than me because she actually lived the abuse. But the response has tended to be very hard on behalf of the police, on behalf of management and the police, and kind of calling the police to intervene in certain occupations almost immediately, not allowing open spaces, or occupation where you're allowed to come in and out. And it's been very somewhat of a harsh take on it. Now, what kind of resulted in these 4 occupations, and then maybe it's tied to the institutions which they were, more prestigious in a way, so more like careful of their image. And I think this is especially for LSE, like the logo, the image it has on a national and international level is fundamental, or for them at least. So maybe tied to this, they responded in a different manner, did not kind of go hard immediately, and did not call the police, and allowed for it to be an open space. And so again, I think and this was something that even someone like looking at the strategy of it, because these universities have become like businesses, because so commercialized, because the image and their kind of logo and the way they're presented has become so fundamental to their own nature. This is a strategy we have to start using. It's attacking that, and that's where they're most vulnerable. And I think, again, in part, the reason for which at LSE we managed to get some important demands met was because we kind of attacked that, both in practice by satirically attacking the director, who's somewhat of a known public figure, Craig Calhoun, but also by putting out the threat that these universities obviously would have a media impact, at least on a national level, of having students being dragged out by police from an occupation because of its profile, because of its leftist profile to an extent. And so the fact that playing with this, especially if certain demands are intending to be met, or if that is our immediate aim, is something that at least has seemed to work on this occasion, at least for LSE. So yeah, again, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Another question is if you learned something from the Occupy movement, primarily from what went wrong of the 2011 movements, but also the new political language that they introduce, and I don't know, are the Occupy style general assembly you're using fashionable as they are the most effective for the purpose of broad mobilization? According
Okay. Yeah, I mean, okay. So, I mean, first of all, on a personal level, I was not in London during the Occupy movement, but obviously, the broader Occupy movement has a lot of the social movements going around in the United States, Europe, in general. So, I think obviously there's also big, large, broad differences in the kind of Occupy style being applied to a citywide, General Assembly and occupying public spaces, and that tied to the university. I personally think that, notwithstanding its flaws, I mean, the Occupy movement did bring something positive to the table, especially tied to practices, forms of organization, and also the kind of the broader idea and the whole challenging of the values and the conception of what is possible. And I do think, and again, I'm going to speak for me at LSE, and I think there's also various kind of different opinions tied to this. We did take many things from the Occupy movement, or from some of the strategies that were adopted in the alter globalization movement, aside from the form of organizing, but also the emphasis on the prefigurative politics of it. And so from running consensus, which I found, at least in a space like this, to be a very important tool, both as a tactic against management, actually, because while having certain leaders that are able to speak for the group, operating through consensus, through general assemblies, and through delegates that go and negotiate, allows for much more reflection and much for discussion after the negotiations, and it doesn't allow to have like certain individuals being empowered and being able to negotiate for the group, which is an advantage in negotiation tactics with management. On the broader issue of prefigurative politics or assembly model brought by Occupy in a way, I do think to an extent, and again I don't know if this is not like a defense of the Occupy movement in general. It's more what's been taken from it that can or has worked. The emphasis on somewhat like the spaces and what to do with the spaces. So in a way, like the prefigurative politics aspect of taking a space during occupation and not merely using it for demands, but also using it, in what it can give in its own manner. So again, like this is how the Free University of London somewhat came up as a concept. Was we're going to occupy with certain demands, but we're going to use this space to put in practice or envision or re-envision and reclaim what university is and should be about. So in that, it's a tool. It's not obviously going to be the university of the future, but it allows us to even for ourselves, re-question and really deconstruct and articulate criticisms to what the kind of university system has become, and also come up with proposals as to how to change it, coming from a collective. And I think the broader significance of this, which I think can seem very utopian if done in a plaza and saying, oh, this is Zuccotti Park, this is the General Assembly that one day is going to govern New York, but doing it within an occupation where you have 30 people coming up in a democratic manner through consensus processes with proposals on how to go about changing the university really does show the significance and the total non-necessity of all this bureaucratic structure of management which has been imposed and is dominating these universities, at least out here. And I think again, I was in Italy recently speaking to a couple friends there, and it's interesting to see how this is the direction where it's headed. It's Italy's a very bureaucratized country already, but in the university governance, the direction is always more these managers and running it more like a business. And I do think there is a lot of value in using some of these assembly tactics, models, whatever the hell we want to call them, as an implicit and explicit critique of this whole bureaucratic management system through which universities are governed. So that would be I mean, again, I don't want to defend Occupy in total, because I think again it's important to have a dual focus and demand things or try and change things and act upon it. But there is also some value, and I think we learned from it in the more prefigurative side that kind of Occupy has brought about. And I don't even say it's Occupy; it's more, we can even go back to the global justice movement or whatever else. And I think we had David Graeber, who's a lecturer here, who's a big advocate of, who's helped organize Occupy, and he partook a lot in occupation. So obviously, I think we kind of have that influence. So we may be a bit partisan of favor. I don't know.
Yes, we are going to present tomorrow a video of.
No. Actually, at 6:30, not tomorrow.
At 6:30, yes, sorry. At 6:30, we're going to present a projection of the video by Graeber, which is the resistance in time of
total brutal.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
The lecture he did in Amsterdam University.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that.
Would you like to add something else, Maham, about the response of the institutions and how they deal with your occupation?
The response of the institutions. Well, we had a slogan at LSE Occupy, which was all managements are bastards. I think that's probably all I can add. I mean, the thing is, management, no matter whenever you're looking at politics as outside of the structures of political engagement, just the idea that management might want to engage is just a fallacy because they're there to maintain the status quo. So if we fall into the trap of thinking that, oh look, we pressure, the management will give in, it doesn't really work that way. And so, yeah, I suppose that's kind of like, it's better to be able, what management tries to do is tries to suck the life out of any political activity students are doing by either channeling into the structures or just like, you know, bringing the police in or something like that. So all management and cult bastards.
Yeah, no, I think just also to repeat Maham's point, because I think it is fundamental, and especially here, it was also a process of learning this, you know, because management, at least here, has posed itself, at least initially, as like the friendly relationship or we're on your side kind of shit, is really fundamentally like realizing that they are your enemy, that they are our enemy. I mean, they, you know, if they're, you know, regardless of what their intentions are, it's not even to demonize them as individuals, but they are your enemy. And I think, you know, whatever they do is always going to be trying to channel it within the same institutions if they're nice and if they're more strategic, or calling the police and kicking you out. And I think that's something, at least at LSE, that took a process for many people to realize that. And once that got down, once that was, you know, taken for granted, that negotiations don't work. It's not about negotiations, what you can pressure them into giving, if that's the attempt, or in general what you do without interacting with them, which is what matters. And I think that was a lesson that, you know, at times had to be relearned, and Maham was involved a lot in the 2010 occupations and, you know, broader movement, and I think that was also an issue they kind of dealt with and learned, and then we kind of had to relearn it as an intergenerational thing. But, you know, yeah. And then we have these great slogans, AMAB, all management are bastards, but
Okay.
So
Yes.
the last $1 million question is that if it's possible to develop a long-term educational process, autonomous and free, and I think this is the real purpose of the Free University of London, to try to
substitute
and to create an autonomous institution.
The classic academic system.
yeah. So, just to go back on the story of it. So the kind of Free University of London initially was kind of a name that we attached to the various occupations, somewhat, you know, autonomously and not very, without a very concrete understanding of what it was going to be. It was, you know, again, an emphasis of realizing that it's the space and what you do with the space to try and create an alternative, you know, educational system or space or whatever you want to call it is what mattered. But, you know, when the initial occupations kind of came about, you had these 4 universities adopting the name, the Free University of London, but it wasn't much more than that. From coming out of the occupations, this has been the broader intent, has been trying to articulate, formulate, and try and put in place somewhat of a, you know, in itself like an autonomous network structure that allows to, on each university campuses and outside of it, create and bring about autonomous educational spaces. And I think, you know, the 3, we've been trying to write this manifesto or whatever statement for way too long, and it's been very difficult because so many different ideas have been put into it. But the kind of 3 aspects that come out of it, you know, from one is the access to it. So, you know, trying to create autonomous educational institutions or places, you know, that are universally accessible, free from forms of discrimination, and so forth. But the other aspect, which at times is lost in engagements directly on campus, is that tied to the knowledge produced within the university institutions, and it's something that oftentimes is not realized. But how this whole, you know, especially we can blame it again on the structure of this business model or commodified university. But what this has brought about is not only a completely acritical, you know, pursuit of knowledge, especially in the social sciences, but like knowledge and forms of knowledge that are nothing more than reproduce the same forms of inequality and disruption. I think again, like LSE is a very symbolic for this. We have the fucking one of the most important economic departments in the world, unfortunately, who does nothing more than propagate this neoclassical rhetoric, ideology, and logic, which has contributed to the destruction of this fucking world. But so again, so it's like, you know, these are the kind of questions that we try and interrogate ourselves. It's how to create about and how to bring about a different space for education. And I think again, you know, the 2 points that we've been trying to emphasize is the type of knowledge. And I think again, so on one side it's the knowledge produced within it, but it's also like, you know, trying to liberate and give value to alternative forms of knowledge, oftentimes ignored within university institutions, mainly those emerging from practice, mainly those emerging from experience. You know, the forms of knowledge that are articulated and taught and learned, you know, in local communities and not in university campuses. And again, this allows us to also bring about a broader critique of not only, you know, how acritical the knowledge taught within university is, but also how, you know, Eurocentric, white focused. You know, there's so many critiques that has to be brought about, especially when you look at the statistics of university professors and lecturers. You know, LSE, we had this discussion with the director. You have, you know, 3 black staff, 3, you know, out of a couple thousand or 5. You know, it's insane. And you know what this, you know, this obviously, and again, it's not only the it's not only the ethnicity. The question again lies: how many in academia do not come from a privileged background? How many, you know, how much working class knowledge ends up being in these institutions? And it's allowing spaces, and it's beginning from those. It's beginning from the forms of knowledge that are oftentimes excluded from these institutions, that you also end up coming up with more critical forms of knowledge that address the broader issues that are coming up within society. We had John Holloway, who came down here and give a little discussion presentation. He's a professor, he's a sociology professor who teaches in Puebla, Mexico. I very much appreciate his work. He wrote the book Changing the World Without Taking Power. But one of his two really interesting points I think I want to reiterate. The first was tied to the 2010 protest here in London, which, you know, obviously the fees were tripled from 3,000 to 9,000, with also, you know, a politician from the Liberal Democrats, Nick Clegg, who had gone around the country during the electoral campaign, pledging he was going to like lower tuition fees, who goes to government with David Cameron and triples the university tuition fees. And his reaction was like, yeah, obviously there was to the movement, and it was very strong, and it was something that, you know, definitely also brought about political unrest for like the coming years. But the reaction was like, why weren't universities burnt down? It's not to say that we want to burn down our universities, but this is the type of reaction we have to have on campuses. This is what we have to be ready for. You know, his example again was in Mexico City, or in Mexico, when they tried to raise tuition fees by 100, the equivalent of less than like 50 pounds per year. You know, universities went into occupation for a year. And so as students, because of somewhat the privilege that we already have and having this time, you know, to be able to engage in politics, and, you know, this is the kind of response we have to have. The other aspect that I wanted to mention from John Holloway was, again, it's like, you know, what is the purpose of the social sciences, especially, if not to try and at least, you know, engage constantly in the question of like, how the hell are we going to get rid of capitalism, or how the hell are, you know, try and engage with that question constantly. Sociology or anthropology or all these disciplines like should be, as a prerequisite for them, anti-capitalist. It's how can you be a sociologist in one way or another without kind of engaging that? So, you know, these are the kind of questions and issues we have to start challenging. And obviously, you know, given the lack of time and given the lack of attention that's given to all these broader questions of, I don't know how to change the world, but like, you know, how to engage with social movements, etc. Like, those should be the primary questions tied to any form of alternative institution or educational institutions we want to create. The last point to this is also that tide of action, or like, you know, transform or going from theoretical reflections of one sort or another to action. And this, I think, is again an issue that opens broader questions on the role, especially of social sciences and, you know, humanities in a way. Is what role can social sciences play within broader movements. It's trying to going away, at least in my point, from like a Marxist vanguardist position where you kind of have scientific revolution or whatever you want to call it. But in what forms can social disciplines engage without kind of laying down the strategic path for revolution or for social change, but at the same time engage and actively contribute to broader social movements? Because again, we can have all the theoretical reflections and critiques that we want, be it within universities or outside of them, but if that is not translated into one form of action or another, it becomes a very sterile process. We can sit all day discussing about how fucked the world is, but if we don't act upon it, there's obviously a broad issue. So these are some issues and questions that we should try and articulate in whatever kind of form of autonomous institution or not even institution, educational movement that we kind of want to bring about. I'm sorry, I spoke too much for Maham. I hope it's that we could not hear you very well, but I hope I didn't take too many things out of your mouth, or no.
We have too many questions from the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alessio?
Hello.
Okay, can you hear me from here?
Yeah.
I want to ask you question in political terms, but I wish you answered in practical terms, if possible. I heard from you and other free university environments. I keep hearing expressions such as democratic university, democratic education, and on the other hand, there's this democratic issue that goes along with autonomy. And I wonder how these two things match, because actually all of this demanding delegation is really the same mechanism that brought to an affordable university or context we don't really like to be forced to study. And I wonder, in the negotiation practice and all of these, anything you want to achieve, how you choose to do what to achieve that, remembering that it's exactly the people to whom you asking something that denied something earlier. I mean, how does democracy goes with autonomy?
But you mean, okay. How does democracy go with autonomy? You mean like as a movement side or as a rhetoric? Because I think, obviously, oftentimes these universities pose themselves rhetorically as being democratic, and that's the kind of like counter discourse they pose. But
is democracy even a good aim?
Within university, you mean?
What we want. Actually.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, then again, this ties to, like, obviously democracy is a term which has been broadly co-opted or merely used as rhetorical, as a rhetorical tool to legitimize whatever form of non-democratic governance that they kind of want to achieve in whatever institution. I mean, even here at the current universities, you kind of have the student union model where you kind of elect, somewhat similar to Italy, but like, where you elect a delegate or a representative that then interacts with management, but it's obviously a non-democratic form of governments in that sense. So I would advocate personally for a reclaiming of what democracy is, because at the current moment, even the term itself has come to signify nothing more than this rhetorical sprinkle, which with the gloss, all these various institutions. I think democracy, at least in my view, and is a fundamental. It's not even a principle. It should be a fundamental practice, but it has to be reconceived, not in a representational manner, but as something, that you can see as real democracy or participational democracy or participated democracy or whatever else. But it's in that idea that one.
Well, it's real democracy. I mean, what you just said is real democracy, and it's what we I think we historically we coming to see the limits of democracy, and these same things you
Yeah. Yeah, no, but I mean, I would say I would differentiate clearly between what we're told democracy is, like on a governmental basis. And we say we live in a democracy, be it in the United Kingdom, in Italy, the United States, or other Western worlds, or elsewhere. Like this term is, oh, we live in a democracy. You have to go and vote every X years, and that's your form of democratic representation. And obviously, the system is flawed. But I wouldn't say it's flawed because of the term, because I would say it's flawed because it's not a democracy in any way. Or better yet, we can go and criticize forms of representational democracy and try to advocate for different democratic forms, be it bottom up, be it based on, assembly based, be it participated. I think, again, I think having lived in Italy, it's unfortunate this discourse has been as well co-opted by Grillo and that whole crew. But this is something that the movements in general, from Occupy, from the global justice movement onwards, there has been in extra-parliamentary movement, especially this emphasis on horizontality and on which is taken to reconceive what democracy is.
No, let me stop you. I
don't know if this is the question. I don't know if I'm
exactly no. It's exactly this, because we all want to get to something, to some rights. I want to get to this switch from rights to freedom, and and that's not rhetorical. And the extra, I think you mentioned the parliament, the extra party or extra parliamentary democracy. I think you, if I'm not misunderstanding you, you mean that as real democracy or something, okay? And that's exactly it. And identifying this real democracy opposite to the parliament democracy as horizontality, I think it's the mistake we don't have to do now, because it's what we, in 10 or 20 years, it's going to lead us to re-find us in this same problem, but even wider, because it's going to be us who
legitimize, yeah.
Okay, all of these.
But I mean, okay. I mean, I see the critique. Again, I think this is somewhat outside of the discourse of these issues. But I think it's not, when I talk about real democracy or when we talk about extra parliamentary real or participated democracy, I mean, it's not merely tied it's tied to certain practices and certain forms of organization that truly allow, and it's inherently tied to autonomy and decentralization. I mean, that is somewhat the key issue behind it. It's a reconception of the structures of organization that allow for real democracy to be practiced in not a merely rhetorical form. We, on a broader scale, we can take the examples of Rojava, which is one, and the kind of like the assembly model they have proposed, which is inherently tied not merely to like the rhetoric of freedom of participated democracy, but to a structuring of decision-making process which runs from the bottom up, so from communal and from council assemblies to with system of delegation upward. I mean, I think, again, tying it more to the kind of current practices, I think, it's definitely possible as a starting point to try and attempt to organize a small project, be it, a relatively small project, be it the Free University of London, be it, a social center or whatever other organization where you don't have that many people, say 20, 30, 40, to structure the practices and the meetings in a matter through consensus, I would say, but you can find other ways that try to be as democratic as possible. That's a starting point. Then how to bring it about on a wider and further level, that's a whole discussion that has to be had. I mean, I do agree in a way with what you're saying, that there is a danger that this rhetoric of, participated democracy or real democracy is going to be co-opted again. That is the danger. But I think maybe, again, we should focus less on the term and try and engage with the practice and emphasize that and trying to find different forms of organization in the autonomous practices we engage in, to then try and make sure, or to try and bring it about not as another form of rhetoric, but as a different practice.
Yes.
One last thing. So at the end of the day, do you think the only way to get many, as contrary to few people organizing together, is democracy? I mean, like, there are many examples of things that work as an organism because this democracy over organization is not used. I mean, the open source example. That, do you call that democracy? I don't. If you call that democracy, okay, but
the open source model, no, but that's not. No.
no, it's just a parallel between you mentioned quantity of people, meaning it's not. You need an organization to do things with many people.
I mean, I think again, and maybe we should get Maham involved in this. But I think again, the issue here is not. It's not saying that you don't need organization. I mean, I think that's one of the, especially from a more, these are practices that have been emphasized, especially from more anarchist trends within the alter globalization movement. But it's not a rejection of organization in total in any way. It's trying to engage with practices of organization that allow for a non-hierarchical structuring, or better, to try and engage with practices of organization that are horizontal. I mean, this doesn't mean that you're not going to have any groups at all. It's quite the opposite. But it's trying to say that in structuring and in organizing your various groups, you do so in a horizontal manner, or that's at least what you aspire to. So obviously, this is an inherent critique to, But yeah, I mean, this is my personal politics coming out. But it would be a rejection of a single, huge, organizational institution to which promote change. I would envision it more as a network, or of a decentralized network of various groups. We can call them organizations if we want to. I mean, that the term is insignificant, but that operate at a local level, or that operate, with more concrete ties and somewhat come together when necessary in organizational practices, as a network. I mean, again, I see it's dangerous. I realize that in these terms, again, especially in Italy, how these terms have been to an extent co-opted as to meaning, I do see the trend that these are already practices that are already being co-opted by parliamentary institutions. I mean, Podemos is an example of it. Grillo in Italy is another one, which took all this language and all these practices. Well, not the practice, it took the rhetoric of the alter globalization movement. It took the rhetoric of many Latin American struggles, and went about saying, oh, we're going to be the citizens participating in the democratic process in Italy, blah, blah, blah. And then what did he do? He created a hierarchical structure where he commanded. I mean, but this is we always got to be wary of co-optations of all these sorts. It doesn't mean that the practice in itself is not valid. But, there's always, I don't know if Maham wants to contribute to this, but
yes, just wanted to ask you, how do you practically overcome this problem in the negotiation?
Well, I think this is not the problem. This was the opposite. This was quite the opposite. This was the resource, because in negotiations, especially when you come up with demands, or you're asking certain things, the classic model or whatever, the classic, if you have a group, you send a representative to go and negotiate for the group, who makes certain decisions and then kind of brings them back. By doing this, by operating through consensus, and by having whoever went to negotiations merely as a delegate who did not have the authority to make any binding decisions, what it allowed for was to not, on one side, to be able to reconsider any practice of negotiation that occurred at the table, which also means, especially one can say as students, sitting down at a table with bureaucrats who have been trained their whole life to engage in these negotiations and to, like, kind of beat you off, or like, they're experts at this. This is their game, And obviously we can't pretend as, like, 19, 20-year-old, 25-year-old students who've never done this before or have not engaged in such a practice on a constant basis to, to be as good at them as at it. They're fucking experts. So, but, by actually having the people that went into negotiations as delegates, we'd come back to the group and we start discussing, what was been said, and also, deconstructing and, like, coming back and, realizing the kind of power that we had by keeping that room. And also, this allowed us to not fall in their traps or in the offers, in the sterile offers that they presented us, but actually maintain on a constant level our principles and our broader aims. And I think that was, that's actually one of the key things, one of like our key resources in the broader engagement that we had with management, was that we were operating through consensus. And in fact, when the occupation came to an end, it was like the whole strategy brought up by management was to find a way through which they could break our consensus. What I'm saying is that they were looking for a way through which they could negotiate with us without having us operate and kind of like come back and decide together through consensus. And that's such a powerful tool, in these practices of negotiation, which are inherently, which inherently create hierarchies within a movement. So, and also the other practice, just to finish, that we used in negotiations, because it wasn't just one time, but we ended up going to 4 or 5 sessions of negotiation, is that we sent 4 people each time, and every time we would change at least 2 of them. So then they did not build somewhat like a relationship with the people that went there, which allows to engage in various and be intimidated into to try and pressure the individuals, but by changing them, it also allowed to have to not have them fixed points that they could use. So.
Hi. Very fast question for both of you. We have 10 minutes, I think, remain to whatever. It's a question, we were talking here before about this. What do you think, do you think that Occupy movements, for example, in New York, a limit was this lack of relation with the working class people and the trade unions, for example. And it's something that I feel is lacking in most of the student movements in Europe and around the world. What do you think about this? The Free University, the Free State University, was a victory of the working class after the war, especially in UK.
Yeah.
Also in France and Italy, and this made possible, the rise of a middle class, the working class children could study and become doctors, whatever. And don't you think that the state university, as a victory and a property of the working class, should remain as it was? So an everybody university, and don't you think that the Occupy movement should connect with trade unions, even if they have a lot of limits and problems and yes, so
yeah, on the university aspect, of course, I think unfortunately here in Britain especially, and I think unfortunately in the rest of Europe, what was a victory of, again, working class political rise, the public university accessible to all, is now constantly being eroded, and here to an extent where it already has been eroded, because it's a situation where, and I don't know enough about the history of British universities to kind of articulate it. I'm sure, Oxford and Cambridge, notwithstanding their cost, has always found other mechanisms, and here meritocracy is, one of them, through which to exclude the working class. And I think, one of the broader problematics or problems of British university, if you had them be tuition free tomorrow, they still would be incredibly elitist, and they still would be inaccessible to most working class backgrounds because of the whole like structure of the whole educational system from elementary school onwards. You know, all based on this assessment, all based on, you know, horrible, not horrible, but like pretty bad public schools. And if you want to get a good high school education, you have to have money to pay for a private school, and, you know, all based on these forms of assessment, etc. That make a system to which, even if it was completely free, even if, you know, they had all forms of bursaries or whatever, you know, you still would probably have the same elite and the same children of the elite kind of going to the system, which I think is a very important thing to, you know, to take back. I'm Italian as well, so like, you know, in Italy, when you hear all these calls for more meritocracy, all this, you know, in school and everywhere else, you got to realize, like, sure, you can, to an extent, one can say that, well, meritocracy doesn't even work here. But even if it did, like, this is the system which, you know, this is the system that it brings. It's not in any way a progressive system. Quite the opposite. It's another mechanism of exclusion. So I mean, so all right. So in that, you know, in that regard. And again, LSE is probably the worst, you know, campus in Europe for this. It's probably the campus in the university in Europe which has, you know, the most privileged students, and it has least working class background here. It's insane. It really is crazy. So of course, I mean, within university, within the occupation itself, that was, you know, an issue, or, you know, because it somewhat it reflected the student body. And if you have a student body who is primarily coming from middle class, if not even not middle class, but, you know, an elite, obviously the context is going to be different. And I think, you know, that also it raises the issue of, you know, what was not brought up at these occupations, what was not addressed. And oftentimes there are issues of access, there are issues, you know, the broader issues of tied to the elitism inherent in these institutions. And so, you know, tied to that, I think, as a broader, somewhat, you know, university movement or student movement in London and elsewhere, it's trying to, you know, the emphasis should be focusing on the other those other universities where it have much more working class presence. London, which are also the ones that have, unfortunately, the lower levels of instruction, education, you know, the education level itself, and also the ones that are facing more cuts even now. London Met is one of them. But, you know, there's a lot of these second class universities in the UK which have more working class presence, which, you know, would probably also get much less attention if there was any form of occupation. And again, I think that also allows to reflect on, you know, I'm very happy with what happened here at LSE, but, you know, it was 40 students, occupied a room, tried to do something with it, and we got an inherent amount of attention on a national level or international level. I mean, not to boast, but, like, you know, why is that? You know, it's because LSE is a name, because LSE is a known institution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's not as if the issues tied to university are here. I mean, here, you know, the students here are, for the most part, are fine. They're already privileged. Like, that's, you know, so it's, while, you know, it enabled us in a way of, like, doing a more broader structural and, you know, theoretical critique and try to address that, you know, the more concrete struggles and issues are at the other universities, or, for example, of the majority of youth who don't even go to university, you know, and or the broader, the whole, you know, the whole system of education. How to address that is one issue, and I think, again, it's like how to engage and how to, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, how to engage with working class students, but how to make that the focal point, not, you know, doing it for them, but how to engage a form of organization that allow for that. And again, I think this is another issue that has to be raised, is like, when one is paying, and again, this is the inherent danger of tuition fees, is that when one is paying £6,000, £9,000, or even less, like, per year, you know, if one has the money, to an extent, one can say, all right, the hell with it. You know, I'm going to dedicate this year to political engagement, or I'm going to, you know, occupy, I'm going to risk my degree, or whatever else. I mean, because they have a safety net behind them. You know, the question arises again whether, or, you know, how one who does not have that much money, or who is struggling, or who comes from, you know, a different economic background, you know, the dangers of, like, what the consequences can be of occupying, or of not pursuing the education that one is theoretically paying for. I think that's a reflection to be had. On the Occupy movement, again, I mean, it's difficult for me to speak about it because I did not participate in it. But I think, again, you know, that is the broader issue and broader context. I wouldn't say, explicitly about the non-inclusion of unions. I mean, I would say it's more the issue of engaging with working class, or having that as a primacy of the struggle, not as a representational token, but as like the root of the struggle. And I think again, and that's something that has to be thought about and emphasized. And I think there's always the big issue of what do you go organize and act for the working class, or you organize and act for a specific ethnic group. It's how to find forms of cooperation, solidarity, or collective engagement, and that's issue. So yeah, I mean, I think also it's going to be interesting. The United States might offer some interesting, what's going on now in Ferguson and Baltimore and the broader Black Lives Matters issue. I think shows a movement which engages in tactics which are, to some extent, different from also Occupy, but it was inherently driven by the working class or the underprivileged classes. And I think the primacy should be given to these kind of movements and seeing how those come about. Because to an extent it is true. I mean, I think also the practices themselves of consensus, or oftentimes the broader rules and practices associated with these free spaces and liberated spaces, I think especially, I don't want to say especially, but to UK, oftentimes end up being very exclusionary towards working class. And I think that's a broader issue that's, a question is how to address it. I think, yeah. But maybe Maham can take a couple points. Sorry, I overspoke for Maham, but
Maha, do you have something to say about this working class issue?
Yeah, well, the reason why past movements, I think, haven't really worked out in terms of the student movement is because we're trying to defend a system that doesn't work. And it's not that it doesn't work at a university level, it doesn't from the beginning, like from elementary level, where working class kids are constantly told and taught that they can't achieve their potential, and universities are these glass houses that we'll never ever be able to achieve, aspire to. And if we continue to fight to defend a system that doesn't work for the working classes, it doesn't work for minority groups, we're trying to defend a system that is racist, is elitist, and that's probably why we can't ever really win until or unless we show that there are alternative ways. And I think that's kind of why the Free University is quite good, because it's trying to change an alternative education system can look like. And over here we're doing a lot around why my curriculum is white, and that's probably something that the rest of Europe should look into as well, because having done my second part of my school in Italy, I'm very, very aware of how the system is. So yes, obviously we have to work with unions and libraries on in our institutions, but at the same time, I just think that there is a balance of trying to defend something that doesn't work to begin with.
No, okay, perfect. Well, we don't have any more questions, or we don't have any more something to ask you. And if you don't want to add anything else, we can thank you, and we can close the conversation here now. I think, well, we thank most of all for your time, because we didn't think to steal 1 hour and a half from your time, but it wasn't our intention. But thank you very much for your time and for your disponibility. And what else? Nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
And we'll let you know how it works, how it is going on.
Ok,
Okay. Thank you very much.
ciao ragazzi.
Ciao
Grazie
ragazzi.
Bye.
Buona serata. Ciao ragazzi.
a voi.
Ciao.